Hello. Today we are going to deal with the economic component of the Metropolitan Genoma. And as we have seen in the previous presentation, the genoma of the metropolis is composed of four elements: the economics, the social, the physical environment, and the institutional component. No? We have seen that economy and social are generally in a dichotomy, at odds, trying to pull each other for their own objectives, which is efficiency versus equity, and the physical component can in some way help into that dialogue that has to be equilibrated through the institutions, the governance of the metropolis. We are going to look at the economic component, and the economic component, as classical economics point out, there are three factors in the economic component: capital, labor, and entrepreneurship. And these factors have to be the best possible to achieve competitiveness in the economy, and then being a metropolis that will be able to be competitive in the concert of metropolis around the world. If you are not competitive in that concert of metropolis that, as we saw, are very strong, powerful economic build-ups, extremely productive, if you are not competitive, you will be out of the game worldwide. And as we are globalized, you need your metropolis to be competitive. How to make the metropolis competitive? You have to make the metropolis competitive to achieve a good capital investment, to achieve a good labor force, and to achieve a good entrepreneurship and competitiveness in that entrepreneurship. Let's look at those three factors one by one in a metropolis and in the economics. When you are dealing with capital, you are dealing with fixed capital and circulating, running capital. No? A metropolis is extremely important. The fixed capital is the infrastructures, is the roads, is the buildings, is all the fixed elements that constitute what we call a metropolis. No? And that, to be able to attract these capitals to your metropolis, capitals are looking for high return, high liquidity, and low risk. So you have to provide an economy with these elements to be able to attract the capitals to your metropolis. And you should not forget that when you are making policies, when you are implementing policies in the metropolis. These factors have a limit. There is a 19th century psychologist that created the Wundt curve. It was Wundt from Germany. And the Wundt curve, you have a maximum moment, and then you decline, and you can even go into negative numbers. And that applies a lot into metropolis. For instance, the congestion of the traffic in metropolis. You must have an infrastructure to be able to respond to the needs of traffic. But if you put too much traffic, that will congest the roads, and you will end up with a gridlock in the old metropolis. What should you do? Should you increase that infrastructure? Some say yes, you should increase that infrastructure to be able to provide more transport. Some say no, what you have to do is to manage that capital, that infrastructure, to make it more efficient and to have other alternative means of providing that service, and not just by adding up infrastructure. That's a debate that we will see later on in these lectures. But you see how you have to focus on the capital that you have invested in the metropolis to be able to make it work-wide. Metropolis have a limit in the accumulation of that infrastructure capital. We have throughout the history of the world three phases: the metropolis that do not have that capital, the metropolis that built up that capital, the metropolis that have achieved such a level of capital that they do not need much more. What they need is to manage that capital, to tame those capitals. I am thinking about mainly Paris, London, New York. It's so complex to understand those metropolises. There are so many capital invested in the infrastructures, transport, and so on, that it really is a challenge to be able to work around, to go around the metropolis, to understand the management, to understand how to use that huge capital. So you have to tame it to make everyone able to use for the best interest and for the best benefit that capital. So only those large metropolises have reached that. The other metropolises are growing into that situation, but you see how you must understand the mechanism of capital to be able to manage the metropolis. The other element is entrepreneurship. In the 19th century, classical economics was land. That was the times of Marxism and so on. It's not anymore land, it's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is extremely important, as is the way of putting together the elements, the assets of your metropolis in such a way that it will be more competitive and more efficient. And entrepreneurship is based in two elements: management, which is a basic knowledge that you can learn how to manage those assets in the best way possible. But there is another element, which is innovation. And the world is changing. We are not anymore in the century. The 20th century was a century of cheap labor to have low prices, to be able to put your goods in other markets and to be competitive. We are not anymore in that century. We are in a century of innovation. Innovation allows you to have a product that will be unique. You are the only one that has that product. And then by having that product, you are in some way have a monopoly. You are the only one to have that. You can put the price you want to that product. Always the demand will have a limit and you cannot get crazy about that. But you have a monopoly, and that is what makes your firm, your city, more competitive. That's why cities are fighting in innovation. And we do not work innovation in the same way that we did work traditional economies. In a traditional economy, you have a hierarchical mechanisms, you were siloed in specializations, you had a top-down dialogue and so on. That's not working anymore. This is Antoine van Akmelt that has written a very interesting book looking at that shift in the way competitiveness works all around the world, and the needs to reach that competitiveness. And that's an issue that metropolis are dealing a lot with, the need of innovation and competitiveness. And for that, we must realize that innovation is different from research. No? When you research, you discover, you want to know, the knowledge can be useful, and it has an epistemology. Epistemology is the way you produce science, the science of producing science. You have a way of doing things which is very sound and very rigid, and you have to prove what you have discovered. Innovation is about invention. It's about providing new goods that will be useful to the people depending on their different circumstances and the evolution of the economy. So it's a completely different approach, research and innovation. The third factor of economy is workforce, labor. And there you must have an adequate quality, you must have the best quality for the kind of economic direction you are taking to metropolis, and then you have to have quantity of work, a huge labor force to be able to produce all the goods and to grow in economy and so on. So we are going to see about those elements of the labor productivity, of the quality and quantity of workforce in the social component, so I'm not going to extend myself too much into this element. But we must understand that to have a competitiveness, a competitive metropolis, we must have these three elements. We must understand how the economy works, and we must manage that metropolis in the knowledge to make it more productive and more competitive, because if not, we will be out of the globalization process and we will be in the outskirts of the future of the world. These elements, as you see, economics is one of them. We are going to look at them in the next presentations, and we hope that you will join us for the next presentation that will be about the social component of the genome of the metropolis, and you can download these presentations out of those links that you see in this slide. Thank you very much.